to Impressions Magazine's Ask the Experts podcast and video series, where we talk to veteran professionals from across the decorated apparel industry about the technologies and techniques they've used to help make their own businesses a success. In this episode, we are really lucky to have Jed Seifert, co-founder of Ohio-based Stakes Manufacturing, to talk with us about how and why it makes sense in many cases for decorators to consider hiring individuals with disabilities, a passion of his. Seifert co-founded Stakes Manufacturing, a provider of both premium printed apparel products and fulfillment services, in 2019. Since then, the company has grown to where it is now a major player in the industry, printing millions of units annually. Equally important, Seifert, whose brother Darren has Fragile X, a genetic condition that can result in various developmental and learning disabilities, has been a real trailblazer in the area of helping challenged but still perfectly capable individuals find productive work in the wider world. Not only by taking on a growing number of employees with disabilities at Stakes, but showing the way for other decorators as well. And with that, let's go ahead and check in with Jed. So Jed, it's great to have you with us, and thanks for joining us on Ask the Experts.
Thanks for having me. It's a pleasure to be here.
All right, outstanding. Well, we're just going to jump right into it. So to start out, what I find most striking about hiring people with disabilities, as you describe it, and we first met actually at some Impressions Expos where you talked as part of the Ink Kitchen's shop talk about this. But what I find most striking is that when done correctly, it really is kind of the ultimate win-win. You know, as an employer, you're not only helping out someone, helping them lead a productive, fulfilling life, but you're also, in many cases, affording yourself the opportunity of taking on some of the best, or one of the best workers, or some of the best workers that you can even imagine. So I wonder if you could maybe touch on that a little bit.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think when you're hiring people with disabilities, it has to be meaningful employment. It has to be mutually beneficial, right? If you're doing it for charity, if you're doing it to get the warm and fuzzies, it's just not going to be, it's going to be short-lived. It's not going to lead to long-term success. You know, you have to have, we're running for-profit businesses here, right? So you have to have accountability. You have to have performance metrics. So you really need to focus on working with the employee to set them up to be successful, right? And there's a number of ways that you can go ahead and set them up to be successful. And we'll get into those later in this conversation. But I think, the benefits, as you mentioned, yeah, I mean, they go both sides, right? What my passion for doing this really came from my brother, who's got Fragile X, and him getting a job changed his life, gave him the ability to move out of my parents' house, gain financial independence, work, friends, purpose, all the things that everybody deserves and most of us take for granted, right? And but at Stakes, what we've seen from launching this, what started as a vision turned into a program and is truly the fabric of our business and our company culture at this point, is that the benefits that the company received and the benefits that the non-disabled employees received were just as substantial as the individual with disabilities, right? It taught our managers and our employees empathy and teamwork. It brought people together in a manner that we had never seen, both within individual departments and cross-departmental. It helped our managers become better managers because, they were forced into tailoring their management and training style to the individuals with disabilities. But the reality is they should be doing that with all employees, right? Our goal and job as leaders, owners, managers, supervisors is to really cultivate people's strengths and mitigate their weaknesses to put them in a position to be successful. And it's no different with people with disabilities, right? And while we often talk about people's disabilities, a lot of folks with disabilities have superpowers in other ways. Somebody with autism might have certain social challenges, but the flip side of that is they're more detail-oriented than your average person without disabilities, right? So, we also saw that, people want to work for companies that are making a social impact, right? We had an employee who was running our warehouse, and I asked the gentleman, we started hiring people with disabilities in this department, hey, if at any point you can't hit your metrics because of this, you got to let us know because, we're a for-profit business. And I went back to him a month later and I said, hey, how's it going? It's going great. No, but seriously, are you able to hit your numbers? Jed, these are some of my best employees. And before this, I was moving cotton and cardboard around in a warehouse. Now I come to work and I actually feel like I'm changing people's lives and making an impact. You can't put a price on that. I mean, unless you're like a doctor or there's very few jobs that make you go to work and you actually feel like you're changing people's lives on a day-to-day basis and making that impact. So if you can give that to people, it's really just it's a priceless a gift. I mean, we had another employee who came to me and said, hey, you know what, I got offered a job making an extra $1.50 an hour at Amazon, but I got a cousin who's deaf, and we've seen the way that you work with your deaf employees at this company. Right. And this is really meaningful to me. And I'm just glad to be a part of something that is, doing good for this, doing good for the community, doing good for people like my cousin. And those type of things, you can't put a price tag on. I think the flip side too is with your customers, right? Customers and your partners, they want to work with people who are giving back to the community and making a social impact, especially the younger generation, So I think, internally, it's made us all better, right? And I think, and it's some of our best employees you touched on. So, right, I mean, we've had roughly 40 warehouse employees. Our number one warehouse employee every single month this year is a gentleman with autism. He's actually a graduate from our school to work transition program. We have a partnership with the local high school system and get 12 interns a semester. And then, after they transition out of high school, if it's a good fit for us, it's a good fit for them, they get the opportunity for full-time employment. So this gentleman's, I think he's 21 years old, and he's our best warehouse employee. And that's not warm and fuzzies. There's no charity in that. That's based off speed and accuracy KPIs. That's it. Right. Our top shipper, we have about 30.
Sorry. I was just going to say, it sounds like, from what you're talking about here, and you've talked about, again, we've talked before, but we're not talking about employers doing favors to people here or giving anything away. We're talking about smart business decisions here. I mean, these are going to help the bottom line while you help other people. I wonder, you've kind of talked about a couple of them already, and we're going to because it's business, there's a right way, there's a wrong way. There are procedures for making this happen, systems for making this happen that you've described in your talks before. We're going to dig into those a little bit because there's a lot of help out there for people who want to do this as well, as I understand it. Maybe give us a couple, what kind of people, you've mentioned a couple, what kind of people have you brought into stakes? When I say what kind of people, I don't know if I'm putting that the right way, but people with disabilities. What kind of new employees have you been bringing in, and what kind of jobs are they doing? Because as I understand, if I remember correctly, you've got people doing all kinds of different things at stakes right now. So maybe an idea of the kind of work that's being done and the kind of people who are doing that work.
Absolutely. I mean, we have a spectrum of disabilities that work for us. I mean, we've got folks with autism, Asperger's, cerebral palsy, a number of different, and some that are even undiagnosed, right? But are definitely on the spectrum. We started out in our warehouse for a few reasons. One, to me, it was sort of the most natural fit, and I've worked with other organizations that have folks with disabilities in their 3PLs. It was also because our manager in the warehouse is one of our most empathetic managers. We wanted to make sure we had buy-in out the gate. Because it can be intimidating for folks, right, who have never had somebody with disabilities in their lives or in their circle, and they think that they're going to be overwhelmed and not have the resources to really do it. And we've expanded beyond that, right? So we've got folks in our shipping department. Our top shipper out of about 35 shippers is a gentleman with autism. He applied to work with us because he saw in all of our ads on Indeed that we hire people with all abilities, right? And that, again, speed, accuracy, and by the way, he's got a perfect attendance on the year, and he's excited to come to work. We talked. That was the other benefit we didn't get into before. Is these are going to be some of your employees that are most grateful for their jobs, most excited to come to work. That's contagious to other people. And when you have some of your top performers, literally your top performers having disabilities, it's a real motivating factor to your other employees who might be getting their butts kicked in their KPIs and don't face those same challenges. We expand. So
we're all a little competitive, right?
Absolutely. We expanded into our heat transfer application department, which, there was a hesitation at first. Well, we're using 300-degree pallets that, are they going to close their hand and is somebody get burnt? So, we had to look at some of the safety stuff. But the reality is once we did the safety audit to make sure it was going to be a good position and how we trained and all that, we realized that all the things that we did to make sure that we were going to be safe for this disabled employee, we should have been doing with all employees from the beginning. We've got folks that are helping with our cleaning. We've got folks that are water spiders moving stuff around the facility. Really, we have folks that are running $750,000 DTG equipment. So really every aspect of our business, we have folks with disabilities at this point. I think 10%, roughly 10% of our staff has developmental disabilities. And then we also have the internship program that we talked about before.
Okay, great. Fantastic. Well, and I'll tell you what, let's get into the nuts and bolts. So I very deliberately kind of qualified my first kind of intro question by saying, when done correctly. So, and I know you, in your talks, you've mentioned that you've come across some employers who said, yeah, it just didn't work out. But I wonder if you talk a little bit about the hiring process, again, evaluating people, like any other employee, I suppose, and the organizations out there and the networks out there that are expressly designed to help with this. And I'm going to steal a little bit of your thunder here, I think, because I know, again, hearing your past talks, the shop talk, you talk about you're getting support here, which is, if you were to hire a consultant, right, you'd be paying a lot of money for it. And yet you have these support networks they're working to tailor these employees, make them successful, and it's free, right? Again, good business. So anyway.
Yeah. And you hit the nail on the head, and that's why I am doing all of these speaking engagements. It's why we're screaming it from the mountaintops, because I think that the reality is it's not that people don't want to hire with people with disabilities. They either think they don't have the resources to do it, they don't have the know-how to do it, or it's going to impact their bottom line, right? And the reality is, even myself, who I've been entrenched in the community my whole life, I grew up obviously with a brother, I coached Special Olympics, did mainstreaming programs and stuff like that. I personally wouldn't be equipped to kind of hire and manage folks with disabilities without some support. Let me qualify that. There's plenty of individuals with disabilities that, like the gentleman in our shipping department, who doesn't need any support. He applied for the job, no different than anybody else does. He has zero special accommodations. He's just a great worker. He's at a high skill level, right? But there's also, with disabilities, there's a spectrum of disabilities, right? And there's lower functioning individuals that might need more support, right? That doesn't mean that they're not going to be great workers, right? And I think the reality is people don't understand the support systems that are out there. So there's disability employment service providers. And what they will do is they will come in, they will take a look at your business. They will look at all of your entry-level positions, because all too often people kind of put people with disabilities in a box. And I'm guilty of it too. I never thought my brother would accomplish everything he's accomplished in his life, right? And I've set, unnecessary kind of guardrails like, oh, he can't do that or he can't do that. But the reality is, anytime you tell somebody they can't do something, and time will tell you that things end up getting proven wrong, right? And I think what I've seen is that, so what these disability employment service providers will do is they'll look at all your open positions. You might think it's just a gentleman who's going to work in the warehouse, or just somebody who's going to work, picking and doing a physical task or custodial. But the reality is, people with disabilities learn from repetition, right? And they flourish in repetition. So 95% of what we do as printers and fulfillers is repetitive, right? And that can be monotonous to people that don't have disabilities, but it's actually where people with disabilities flourish and grow, right? So it's where they feel home. But we often look at it as low-skilled repetition, but the reality is high-skilled repetition is just as big of a demo for people with disabilities as possible. And I'll give you an example. I linked up a screen printer with a local disability employment service provider. They went in and they came and did the audit. This person thought that the person that they hired was going to be cleaning screens and doing custodial work. Well, turns out the best fit position for the candidates they had was doing all of their order entry, because they're getting all these PDF POs, and then they're going and plugging them into their system. But, data entry is actually a huge position for folks with disabilities. As I mentioned earlier in the call, certain disabilities like autism make people actually more detail-oriented than most, right? So It makes data entry a perfect position. And a data entry job is another job that can be monotonous, right? People can think it's boring or they burn out. These positions with repetition for folks without disabilities tend to be your highest turnover positions in your company. Right. So one of the other benefits we didn't talk about earlier is employee retention, which is one of the biggest challenges people face today and age with the current labor market. So they're going to have some of your longest tenured employees, and it's also going to help with retention of other folks. So going back to the original question, they'll come in, they'll do an audit, they'll look at all of your open positions. Then what they'll do is they'll find, screen, hire, onboard, and train these employees for you. And all of this is at no cost to the employer. So you're talking about basically having a free hiring agency, a free training agency. And then the beauty of it is they'll also train your managers on how to best work with that employee, right? And it's ongoing support, right? You know, and it varies based off the individual, right? Each individual needs a different level of support. And as I mentioned, some don't need support, right? My brother started off needing support in his younger days, but he doesn't need support right now. He's a great employee. You know, nobody can do his job better than he does, right? So those folks will really help work with you. And then, you know, you get into a situation with an employee and you don't know how to handle it. Your managers don't need to know how to handle it. You just pick up the phone and call the job coach, or the job coach might even be on site with some folks who need a higher level of support, right? And they'll also teach you how to train, right? Because some of the training you might be doing is different, right? Your current training manual might just be text, right? And certain folks with disabilities might not read as well. So adding more visual cues and ways to teach people. And I always say, like, you might find that there's a little bit extra training with folks with disabilities or tailored training, but the positions that you're hiring for are also the positions that have the highest turnover rate. So if it takes me an extra day to train somebody, but I don't have to rehire for their position in 9 months or every single 9 months,
which is a lot of work.
There's a lot of work.
Right,
so it pays a lot of dividends. And these job coaches will really work closely with your management. Right. And then all the things that they're teaching your managers are actually things that, again, we should have been doing for folks without disabilities, because you and I probably learn differently. You might be somebody who learns from listening. I might be somebody who learns from doing. Somebody else might be learns from seeing, right? So everything we do here and everything that we're learning, our managers are learning, and our fellow employees are learning, are things we should have been doing all along and benefit everybody, right?
You know, it occurs to me, we're talking about, you know, individuals with disabilities here, but we're also just talking about people, right? These are people like you and me, you know, and we're all different. And the skills that your company, you're getting free training, right? Professional development in essence, and making everyone better. So
if you stop looking at disabilities
and look at people
as like a deal breaker, and you just look at it as people, and you start going, okay, what are their strengths and what are their weaknesses? And obviously their disability is probably going to cause a lot of the things that fall into their weaknesses category. But that's not what we should be focused on. We should be focused on what their strengths are and putting them in a position to execute on those strengths, right? So for example, we have a wonderful lady who has cerebral palsy. She applied for a job just because, again, she saw we hire people with all abilities. She took an entry-level position folding t-shirts for us. And she wasn't the fastest folder. But we hired her anyway because she was great. And we figured we'd figure something out. And I sat down with her week 1, had lunch with her. Turns out she's got a degree in cybersecurity from a major university. And I'm like, well, what are you doing fold t-shirts, right? So we ended up, now she does reports and inventory reports and audits and she's in front of her computer doing things that I personally can't do, right? So, you know, we also think about disabilities, and everybody thinks about sort of one kind of disability, right? But there's a spectrum of mental disabilities, spectrum of physical disabilities. There's people that got disabilities that weren't born with them. Maybe they got into a car crash, right? So really, again, it's about focusing on people's strengths and putting them in a position to utilize those strengths.
Very cool. I'll tell you what, unfortunately, we're kind of getting a little bit short on time here, but I think we're covering a lot of good stuff. However, real quick, you mentioned organizations, you mentioned support networks out there. I wonder if you could just go, and we will be including links, hot links in the show notes to this, of course. But real quick, while we're on it, I mean, what are like maybe are there a couple national organizations? I mean, it does sound like there's a whole network of support services. Like you said, you work with a high school internship, I think you said. I can only assume there are state agencies, federal organizations. So maybe just a couple of the ones, like a good point of entry for people who are interested in learning more.
Absolutely. I think that there's three great resources that I always refer. Number one is every state has a vocational rehabilitation office. It's a federally funded office that's dedicated to not just people with disabilities, but one of the core things they do for the disabled community is help them with finding employment and supporting employers. Okay. They're different from state to state. So some of them will provide all the services that I mentioned, where they'll help you hire, find, the whole nine. Some of them will just refer you to a local agency, right? And when you look at the local agency side, it's just like any other hiring agency, right? You've got a number in your area. Some are going to be better than others. Some are going to be better fits for your industry versus other industries. So going to your vocational rehabilitation office is always a great place to start. The ARC, which is ARC, thearc.org, they are a fantastic global organization that has chapters in every state. Some of their chapters actually provide these services, but if they don't, they'll refer you to some local providers.
Okay.
APSE, which is apse.org. APSE is the National Trade Organization for Disability Employment Service Providers. Stakes actually had the honor of being named National Employer of the Year by them last year, which is one of our greatest accomplishments, and kind of really was awesome. And also got us working closer with them because you can reach out to them and they'll connect you with some local providers in your area. And I said three, but I guess I got a fourth. The fourth is myself. My name is Jed Seifert, Stakes Manufacturing. I'm on LinkedIn. This is my passion. If this is something you're interested in, send me a message, send me your address of your facility, a bit about what you do, and I will help connect you either to one of these organizations or directly to a local service provider.
Well, you've done it now, Jed. Stakes Manufacturing website is going to be on the show notes too. So, and you guys do great work for anyone who's looking to do some decorating as well. Real quick, one final question before we wrap things up here. Obviously Stakes is a pretty large outfit, but and you hiring a lot. It sounds like a lot of people you hire full time. Is this something where is this a good opportunity for smaller shops as well? Maybe much smaller local decorators or hiring people part time. Is it just something that a big organization, a big organization like yours is capable of dealing with, or can small organizations do this as well? What kind of companies make for a good fit?
Every single company is a good fit. We're talking about people here where, there is no difference, right? Your 10-person company has company culture, has jobs openings, has things that need to be done. No different than your billion-dollar company that's publicly traded, right? So, how they work, what work they do, part-time versus full-time, there's both, right? We, at our facility, we tend to only hire people that are doing full-time work. But the reality is there's a huge portion of the disabled population that literally can't work full-time because of archaic federal policies that say if they work over a certain amount of hours or make over a certain amount of money, they'll lose their federal benefits, and that a lot of them need or their necessary life services, right? So there's a ton of folks that literally only want part-time jobs. And so it's not one size fits all. We also talk about a creative employment a lot of times in the disabled community where maybe you don't have a full-time gig open, but maybe, Johnny in, client services has 2 hours of data entry a day that he does. And, Sarah over in the warehouse has, an hour of labeling that she needs to do a day. And Johnny over in whatever other department has XYZ to do. And you piecemeal little parts of all these things to create a one full-time position where now you've taken all of these tasks that are the repetitive, not necessarily the critical thinking tasks off of other people's plates to then make them more successful at their job. Like, oh, wow, if you free up 2 hours of time that I spend every day doing data entry, I could do everything else that I do best even better during that time. So again, there is no sort of one size fits all. It really just depends on what your needs are, and it's communicating those needs to your local disability employment service provider so they can create the proper match for you, right?
They've done these things before, and they'll recognize the opportunities and what works and what doesn't.
And they'll recognize it on the individual level too, right? You know, even when like we did a job fair recently, a disability job fair, and one of the first questions we asked folks was, do you like sitting down or do you need to be moving all the time? Because there's certain disabilities that make it so you really need to be moving. But that's a huge advantage in a warehouse, right? If I've got a picker who's picking t-shirts, I don't want them sitting down. I don't want them stopping. I want to see that cart moving around all day. Right.
That's right.
So, you know, it's all about just tailoring it to the individual, to the position and to the company. But the benefits and the ROI that you reap from it, it doesn't matter if you're a mom and pop shop, you know, or a multi-billion-dollar corporation. It will have the same impact. Right.
Outstanding.
The only difference being that if in a smaller company, it probably makes the impact even faster because people are exposed to it so fast. Right. With a bigger company, you probably have more resources. Like, you know, if you're a $1 billion corporation, you probably have a whole, you know, D&I division and a huge human resources team. So, you know, it works for everybody.
Outstanding. Well, I'll tell you what, I think that's a good point to leave things off here, Jed. And again, we'll have links in the show notes to this. And I've mentioned this. I find your presentations, quite frankly, very inspirational and very moving. And
thank you.
And all the more so because we're not talking about, you know, we're not talking charity here. We're talking about smart business decisions, and we're talking about people. And I think it's great. So, and again, anyone who wants to get a hold of you, I know this is kind of your passion, and so get a hold of you. But I cannot begin to thank you enough for talking to us today.
Thank you for having me and helping champion our mission of disability inclusion in the industry.
Absolutely. All right, great. Well, we will talk to you later. And again, thanks a lot.
All right. Thank you.
All right. Well, that wraps up our conversation with Stakes Manufacturing co-founder Jed Seifert. For those interested in learning more about Stakes Manufacturing or contacting Jed directly, go to stakesmfg.com. That's STAKESMFG.com. For those interested in learning more about the ARC, go to thearc.org. That's THEARC.org. And for those interested in learning more about the Association of People Supporting Employment First, go to APSE.org. A quick side note, after we wrapped up our conversation, Jed asked me to also note that currently 1 out of 5 Americans identify as having a disability, whether it's a physical disability or a mental one. And within this demographic, Seifert says, people with developmental disabilities currently have an 80% unemployment rate. And that's not because they don't want to go to work. These are folks who are qualified to work. These are folks who are excited and eager and ready to work and be an active part of an organization and the community. So why not give them a chance? Finally, for those interested in learning more about Impressions Magazine and the thrice annual Impressions Expo trade shows in Fort Worth, Texas, Long Beach, California, and Atlantic City, New Jersey, go to impressionsmagazine.com. For now, though, thanks for joining us and keep on decorating.